streaming, and I'll wait for Jaden to give me the go-ahead. Do you all just want to check your microphones? Yeah, you're good.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, welcome everybody. For those of us joining in person, we gather on the land of the Jagera and the Turrbal people, and we pay our respects to them, the traditional custodians of this land, to their elders past, present and emerging. And welcome to our town hall meeting, more of a town hall panel this evening for Pride and Prejudice, where we're hoping to unpack some of the joys, delights and challenges and complexities of everyday life for Christians from the LGBTIQ+ or queer communities. I am delighted to introduce to you this evening our host, our MC, Kevin Breen. Kevin Breen is the chair of Equal Voices Queensland, and if you haven't heard of Equal Voices, like, share, sign up. It's a wonderful organisation whose mission is to connect LGBTIQA+ people and advocates across the Australian church, resourcing and equipping them and their churches to be a truly welcoming and affirming Christian church. I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about what that might actually mean this evening. Churches that acknowledge, respect and utilise the gifts of all, regardless of sex, sexuality or gender. In his other life, Kevin lives with his same-sex partner of 18 years and their 2 7-month-old puppies. So I'll ask about how your sleep's going later. He is a member and lay preacher of Metropolitan Community Church here in Brisbane, and he says he has been fighting. This says he says, but I know he has been fighting for LGBTI equality for the past 30 years. So please welcome Kevin.
When you write 30 years, it doesn't sound painful. When somebody says 30 years, it doesn't actually sound quite painful. I'm just going to pick on one of our guests in the hymn. I love the fact we're having a town hall meeting and we've got someone knitting on the back row.
Yay!
Fantastic. It's just brilliant. So to start, I too would like to acknowledge the original custodians of this land, especially the sister girls and brother boys that have come before us and led the way and are leading the way now. This beautiful land we call home always has been and always will be First Nations land. So I'd like to start tonight with a quote from the author Toni Morrison, and it's one that I lived by for the battle of equal rights in the LGBTI community. She said, "I'm working for a world in which diversity is seen as a source of celebration rather than a cause for alarm." And tonight's conversation about diversity and coming out as an LGBTI+ Christian is also very apt for today's obviously Are You OK Day. And there have been times for us here that our journey hasn't always been okay. In fact, it's been bloody tough at times for us. You will hear tonight some of the panel call our community LGBTI, or LGBTIA+, or gay, or something else, or queer. And that's not to confuse you, but it's what we are comfortable with saying. So I, for example, really struggle to call myself or the community queer, as it was an abuse in my story. So I identify as a gay man who loves rugby union and musicals, and my pronouns are he and him. The one thing all of us on the stage have in common, however we label ourselves, is we identify as practicing Christians. And we all now know that God loves us exactly as we are. God doesn't care who we sleep with, or how we dress, or how we identify. He loves us just as we are, and we in return love him. I say now, as for many of us, because of our upbringing, church doctrine, conversion therapy, and countless sermons we've had to endure, it has been a bit of a process for us all. So that brings me on to the beautiful people you see sat before you, or if you're online, on your screen. Our guests this evening bring together, allegedly, a wealth of experience and knowledge, and I am so pleased to introduce them. So we have Selina Missouri McMahon. Completely fudged that one up. We have Selina, who was born in Dacus, Yorkshire, and following a relatively successful career in IT, entered Holy Orders in the bygone ages of 2003. In 2016, she brought a wife, 2 daughters and a border collie to Australia, where she became the senior priest in the oldest Anglican church in Queensland. In 2020, she transitioned and is the first and so far only Anglican priest to transition and remain in charge of a parish in Australia. She's a lifelong fan of Doctor Who, and she includes lion taming and bare-knuckle cooking in her list of recreational pastimes. She also tells her own lies. And to the far end, we have Ash Hessian, who is in corporate performance and quality strategist, working predominantly within the not-for-profit and human service sector, with a passion for inclusion, justice and human rights. So Ash has joined MCC Brisbane to nurture his faith in an environment that's radically inclusive. Catherine Crow was raised a boy, but she knew better, and at the age of 46, after 4 kids and a failed marriage, she did something about it. Katie is also an IT professional, specialising in not-for-profit and government, and is a member of MCC. She recently married the lovely Adam, that was just a mere 2 months ago, and as a result is now a mum of a total of 9 kids of their own, as well as the countless young people at MCC. And last but by no means least is Jazz Bidgood. They are an English language teacher at TAFE Queensland, and a learner to swim teacher at Aquatic Achievers in Paddington. After growing up in a conservative church surrounded by purity culture teachings, anti-LGBTI+ theory, Jazz has been on a long journey of deconstruction to reconcile their queer identity with their spiritual beliefs, and now proudly identifies as queer, gender fluid, non-binary and polyamorous. So, hi friends, because I do know all of you, which is really lovely. So I'd like you all just to start off by saying your nouns and your chosen pronouns, and we'll start at this end.
My name is Selina Missouri McMahon. It's the 7th most common surname in Ireland.
And your point is?
The point is there are 6 others more common. My pronouns are her and hers, and she. Sorry, she and her.
Katie?
I'm Catherine. Pronouns are she, her, and I can't criticise you about the pronunciation of my name, Kev.
Thank you.
So my name is Jazz, and my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
So I'm Ash, and my pronouns are he, him.
And he too did correct me about the pronunciation of his surname, so I'm quite thankful for that. Alright, so let's start on a very positive note with a question for you all. So what do you think are some of the great joys of being an LGBTI+ Christian of faith? Selina, I'll start with you.
You picking on me?
No, because you're there.
One of the joys of it, really, I think, is being able to be an ambassador for both sides of an argument in some ways. There are people who are Christian who do not understand the LGBT community. There are people who are LGBT who do not understand the Christian community. Indeed, I heard somebody recently saying that it was more embarrassing to come out as Christian than it was to come out as LGBT. So I think that we straddle a nice, comfortable little divide that we can actually form a bridge between, and that's one of the great strengths of being in the position we're in.
Fantastic. Jazz, same question to you.
Oh, I thought you were going to go
I know,
Kate
just
next.
to
Oh,
mess
okay,
it up.
all right, okay. I would say one of the joys of being an LGBT Christian, or a queer Christian, as I tend to say, is that we get to experience not only queerness, but also Christianity in a really expansive way. We get to push the boundaries beyond what other people even think is possible. Like when you have Christianity and then you put queerness on top of it, it opens up a whole new realm of joy and experiences.
Thank you, Katie.
Look, if I hadn't have found faith, I was raised an atheist. If I hadn't have found faith, I wouldn't have transitioned. I wouldn't have realised that I'm loved regardless of how I present, and that I more or less have an obligation to be as God made me and stop hiding.
Cool. Thank you. And Ash?
I think for me, I just have a lot of gratitude for being able to hold both sexuality and then my faith and being a Christian. So reflecting on that, I think, definitely I can see that it opens some doors and it challenges some preconceived ideas and notions of what a gay Christian is and what a gay person is and then what a Christian is at the same time. So I think it opens a lot of doors for communication and it challenges a lot of beliefs that some people have. And I think it's nice to be able to have those difficult conversations. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, thanks. All right, Selena, people make all sorts of assumptions about our experiences in the church what our experiences in the church are like. You're obviously an Anglican priest in ministry in Ipswich, and both these details are often interpreted in the worst possible way. What has your journey been like for you?
Tricky would probably be the best word. I won't say it's been hard. I know there are people who've had a far harder journey than I did. But it's been tricky at times. When I came to Australia only 6 years ago, I was telling somebody earlier on, I knew there was something different about me, but wasn't really entirely sure exactly how different it was. And it was only after I'd been out here a year or so that I realised that actually the inner and the outer conflict of gender and appearance were clearly there. So I was left with a slight dilemma in that my visa depended on me being able to maintain a position in the church in Australia, in this diocese in fact. And I didn't really want to go back to England because we had Boris Johnson and Brexit and things like that at the time, so it held no passion for me. But by the same token, there was something inside that was saying, this is all wrong. What and who you are is not what and who you appear to be. So there was a lot of internal churning going on because I was aware that I can come out to friends and family potentially. There's always the risk that they may no longer be friends or family afterwards. But to come out to a parish that you are responsible for and then to find that the parish rejects you, as in some places, in some dioceses, that would be the case, really would then mean end of Australian life for me. So it took me quite a while to work out how to actually make that transition, that switch happen. Fortunately, I didn't rush into it, took my time, surrounded myself with good close friends, at least one of whom is in the congregation now, who supported me throughout my transition. And when it came to the actual moment of telling the parish, there was such an outpouring of love from the majority of the people in that church that day, that it was quite overwhelming. I mean, I was surprised would be like saying the Pope's a little bit Catholic, but there were some negatives. I knew there was going to be some negatives, and they came from the areas I expected them to come from. But the vast outpouring of love was incredible, and not only that, but it actually opened up an avenue from people's stories, because I had so many members of the congregation coming forward and saying, "Oh, I can tell you now, that was incredible. I can tell you now, my granddaughter got married to another girl last week. We went to their wedding, and I was a little bit worried about telling you because I thought I kept thinking, well, do you not realise by now that actually I don't judge people like that?" But it did give an avenue for that. So it's I don't want to hold the mic for too long. It does give you an enormous privilege to be able to actually hear people's stories like that. The biggest problem I still see, though, particularly in the Anglican Church, is that we are perceived by and large as being very negative. And that's not helped by the media, who, whenever you want a nice little token Anglican, you go to Sydney Diocese or somebody like that. We know, yeah, exactly, I can see the signs in the congregation. We know what they're going to say, we know they're going to cause conflict on screen, and it always looks good on television. We never go to the majority of Anglican it's in the majority of churches who actually are very supportive of the LGBT community. So I think, I'm not sure if I've actually answered the question you asked or answered the question I wanted you to ask, but that's because I would make a good politician. So hopefully
you've sort of answered the question. I do have one follow-up question.
Go for it.
Which I know you're not prepared for. You said in your bio that you're the only person that stayed within the parish after you've transitioned. Was that related to your visa, or was it just because ...
No, it wasn't because of, I mean, I'm sure if I'd needed to, there would have been ways around it. But it was something I did. When I came out here, I'd come out with an intention to serve in the parish for a length of time, and I really saw myself as only being partway through that work, and so I didn't want to move on. But I recognised that choice might actually be taken out of my hands. Nevertheless, you mentioned it's "Are you okay?" day. At that time, "Are you okay?" No, I was not. A month or so beforehand, when the announcement for various reasons was put back a month, I was definitely not okay that day. So, but to answer the question, no, that wasn't the reason behind it, but it was something that I wanted to do because I wanted to stay with that group of people.
Right, cool. So Ash, I'm going to turn to you now. My guess, your experience as a younger adult has been quite different to many of us who probably kept up yourself, who came out decades ago. And so no doubt the needs, demands, concerns of your generation have shifted. So what have your experiences been like, and the kind of differences do you see between your generation and my generation?
I think our generation, I don't know what generation I am. I think, would I be X, Y? I'm 30, so
Millennial.
yeah, millennial probably, maybe. I don't know if I'm comfortable with that.
I just know that you're younger than me.
Yeah. So yeah, I think our generation is one that is getting sick of how stale the church has become, and how inactive on these sort of discussions the church has become. And so I think there was some challenges in my experience, regardless of my age, and reflecting on my church growing up when I eventually came out, there were some relationships that were affected by that, and there was definitely some significant personal challenges that I had to overcome to be able to have those conversations. But what I have found over the last 5-6 years is that my home church that I grew up in, which is a little country town, has got to a point where they don't relate to me with anything other than love. And it's a really beautiful space. I've been able to take my partner, Jono, and that's been, the fact that we can walk into my childhood church and sit together and, hold hands and things like that is a remarkable gift, I think. And I think the other thing is that we are sort of moving into a period now as Christians, and I can feel it and I can see it in the way that, these discussions that we're having, is that we are no longer considering love just as a concept or predominantly as a concept. It's moving into love requires action. And I think the fact that we're here having these discussions and that we are sort of telling the world that actually, some of the ideas that we had about Christianity and about what was acceptable aren't the case. And we're going to challenge those because we love people.
Beautiful. Jan, same question to you really, to what your experience has been like and any differences that you see generational.
So just to recap, the difference between my younger person experience versus a more mature experience, one may say. I definitely resonate with what Ash is saying, in the sense that our generation is becoming known as the generation of call-out culture, I might say. And we're not afraid to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, actually. And we're not afraid to demand better for ourselves. So while in the past, coming out may have been, okay, I'm coming out, but you know, there's nothing really for me, there's no community or whatever. I feel like our generation has, you know, risen up and empowered ourselves, and we've been able to use new technology to find community and find other people like us, so that we're not as alone as previous generations might have felt. And yeah, I also resonate with what Ash was saying in terms of love being in action. Because one of the disconnects that I have felt growing up in the church is there was this constant teaching about, you know, unconditional love and always, you know, demonstrating that love to other people. But what I actually experienced in the church was a lot of empty words. And so I think our generation is really focused on actually doing the work to make places more inclusive and more filled with love.
Brilliant, thank you. Katie, so during your course of your IT career, you've worked for a number of large Christian organisations, and I imagine that some of the things have been done really well with your transition, and some obviously quite poorly, and things may be quite different in other churches as well. How are Christian organisations and agencies doing, and what do they have to learn, and try not to name names?
Oh, no fun. Well, firstly, what is it about transgender people in IT, right? Look, the organisation I came out at was a very conservative church. And as I was saying to somebody earlier, they did it right for most of the time. The staff, when I came out, were just amazing. I got a standing ovation in our team meeting, the whole of IT team meeting when I dropped the bombshell. And the staff was supportive. I had the HR manager who helped me to come out at my wedding. But after I went and had my surgery, things kind of went south. It was kind of, oh, she means it. And there was a rampage. I went through and got rid of all of my supporters in the senior management group because it was being run by the board of the church. And the C-level got pushed to get rid of the senior management group who were supporters. The only ones left standing were the ones who openly didn't support me and liked to push me, and then they pushed me. Very poorly done. I've also worked at another organisation that was pretty much, don't ask, don't tell. And I was cool with that. I was only there for a 3-month contract. And another one where, look, the organisation was affirming, but the IT department was run, quite frankly, by a bunch of incels who were terrified by a woman, let alone a transgender woman. And when they found out who I was, oh, funny, they failed my probation 3 days later. So, you know, church organisations do have a long way to come to conciliate being a church organisation and showing the love of Christ, which the church with of Christ in their name wasn't very Christ-like. But they need to conciliate their obligations as a church with their obligations as an employer. And none of them that I've worked for are doing that really well. They need to realise that, I don't know, I'm a red-letter Christian. I believe the stuff that Jesus said, and he told us to love each other. Now, the fact that I'm a woman doesn't make me any less of an IT professional. But at the end of the day, they did me a favour. I'm working in federal government now, making twice as much. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate what you did for me.
So that's probably going to be what probably was going to be my follow-up question. You're now working for the federal government. How has your journey there been? Is it more accepting?
Oh, they are incredibly accepting, Kevin. I've never worked in an organisation with more gay men, to tell you the truth. Honestly, there's a huge percentage of LGBTI people. I'm obviously the only transgender one, but a lot of people don't care. A lot of people, as I say to my husband, cis me. I got asked if my ex-husband was a good man or not the other day. They're not a very nice person, was my response. But anyway, it's everything from being considered cis to, I just don't care, she's good at what she does. And federal government is way more accepting than any other organisation I've worked in, to be honest. And kudos to the federal public service for that.
Cool, thank you. All right, so this question is going to be to all of you. So we've talked around or to the experience of coming out. How did your preconceived anticipations of coming out stack up against the reality when it came to your relation with the church or other Christians you know and love? Ash, I'm going to start with you, just to mix it up.
Sure. So, to be honest, when I came out, I was at a point in my relationship with Christianity that I walked away. I personally was not able to hold both at that time. And it's really only the last year, maybe even less, that I have been able to come back into that fullness of my faith. So I think the preconceived ideas that I had at the time coming out was that things were going to be so bad that I wouldn't bother trying to maintain relationships or be involved in churches, and I wasn't aware of any supportive churches, and so that was all very heavily and strongly challenged multiple times throughout the last few years, and I sort of just took notice of that in the last year.
Thank you, Jazz.
All right. Well, Kevin, can you recap the question, please, so I don't talk about the wrong thing?
Even if you talk about the wrong thing, that's cool. How did your preconceived anticipations of coming out stack up against the reality?
Okay, so
when it's all coming to the church and
right. My preconceived notions versus the reality. Okay, so definitely I had built up this whole narrative in my head before I came out of like, oh, it's going to be this big dramatic moment, it's going to be life ripping apart, everything's going to crumble. And when I told my parents, they were like, okay, all right, I guess this is it now, I suppose. But I would say that the most difficult part was actually coming out to myself. Because I had spent such a long time, growing up in the conservative church, trying my best to be this, best perfect version of myself that was doing all the right things, following all the rules, and the idea that my very existence was now going to label me as a rule breaker was something that I had to come to terms with. And I spent a good few years kind of wrestling with myself and wrestling with God, trying to make sense of that and find my place in that. Definitely the dramatic part was more of my internal coming out rather than coming out to my family or my friends, who are all lovely. But coming out to the church, however, was a bit dramatic as well. I have attended a few conservative churches in my time. And the most recent conservative church that I attended before MCC, who are lovely, just to clarify, Metropolitan Community Church, great, inclusive, we love them. But what made my decision to start coming to MCC was a church that I was going to before. I had an experience there where, as I was driving to church, I asked God, I just feel like something's off right now, something's not right. So if something happens when I go to church that I don't agree with, that really offends me, then I'll leave and I won't come back. And then when I went into that church building, that message that night was one of the most homophobic, transphobic, etc., messages that I've ever heard. And so that was a really giant sign from God for me to turn away from that church and seek out a new community. But that meant I then had to come out to everyone at that church to explain why I was leaving. And I was involved in a few different Bible studies at that church. And so over the next 2 weeks, I went to each Bible study, and in the prayer time, I said, "Oh yeah, I have a prayer request. Can we pray that I find a new church?" Yeah. And they were all like, oh, no, what happened? What's going on? And I said, yeah, turns out I'm a queer person, and y'all don't respect me, so it's not going to work out. So I felt really empowered by the way that I was able to come out to that church.
Jazz, I've just got to say, nice. Way to go. I wish I'd done it that way.
I will metaphorically drop the mic.
Well, yes. I was involved in the Salvation Army. I was a uniformed Salvationist across the road here, actually. And I was going to their Sunday afternoon service, God's Sports Arena, which is absolutely brilliant. Billy Hunter is a lovely human being. He's a beautiful man. He's probably one of the few salvos that get me still. But I was watching him preaching unconditional love, don't judge, up the front. And all the old majors down the back telling all the queer people they're going to burn. And I'm going, oh, geez, I'm in a bit of bother here. So I left. And then I came out, and people in the Salvation Army got wind of it to the point that I didn't come out to a lot of people. And I just vanished, and thank God I found MCC. Again, I agree with Jazz, just wonderful human beings, and I consider Kevin my brother. And I was told I was going to burn by the Salvationists. I was told all sorts of horrible things, and here I'm burning. Here I am living my life to the fullest. Quite the opposite. And look, it wasn't a good experience. So thank God I found MCC. And I've got to say, the Salvation Army, to their credit, are trying to turn around what they believe in this space. And I've actually had 2 majors at my wedding, which was absolutely fantastic. And they've said to me, time and time again, since somebody outed me to them thinking I'd outed myself, that we don't care what's on the outside. I can look into your eyes and I see it's the same person inside, except she's happy. And if there were more people like that in communities of faith, life would be a lot easier for people like us.
Yeah, as a good Anglican, I'm going to sit on the fence because I've had good experiences and bad experiences in my coming out. I mean, one good experience I had in terms of family, I actually grew up Roman Catholic. It doesn't necessarily make me a bad person, but my mum still is a Roman Catholic, and quite a staunch Roman Catholic back in England. And I came out to her before I came out to the parish. And when she's 80-year-old now. And when I told her, I said, oh, by the way, Mum, sit down, I've got something to tell you. Right, I said, I'm transgender. She said, oh yeah, all right then. So, and that was it. There was nothing more than that. It was so simple and so straightforward. Some people in the Anglican Church I've had more difficulty with. They haven't necessarily understood me. The week after I actually made my announcement in my parish church, I did have one former member of the parish handing out leaflets saying what I was doing was wrong, and all the usual the diatribe that we've, I think, all heard over the years. And it depends on where you go and who you talk to. We talk about the difference between dioceses, but even in this diocese, there are some parishes that I know that I am not particularly welcome, that, gun sites are being adjusted as I approach the border, whereas there are other places, like my own parish, like the cathedral, and I can see we've got people from the cathedral here, and a big shout out to them, who are astonishingly affirming. An illustration of this, I went to, there was a bit of a social gathering with the Dean, Peter Catt. This was before I'd come out publicly. And I, in my ignorance, thought Peter already knew, because Peter knows everything. So I turned up in full cell. And he looked at me and went, "Oh, hello." And then the following Sunday said, "Would you like to preach at Pride Evensong?" And that was how affirming he was about me. He just turned it round and said, "Yeah, we want you on board." And I'm doing the second preachment in a couple of weeks' time at Pride Evensong. So be there at the cathedral, because it's a good place to be. So like I say, it depends where you are. Different people react differently, and that's human nature, I suppose. But you've got to just pick and choose who you stay on side with in some ways.
Yeah, it's very, very true. Okay, so if there's churches out there that want to become safe and fully affirming places for LGBTI plus Christians, what's the one piece of advice you would want to give them, Jazz?
Ooh, okay. The first thing that comes to my mind for churches that are trying to be more inclusive, when people tell you their identity, believe them. It's as simple as that. Don't question anybody or say, "Oh, really?" or "Are you sure?" or anything like that. If someone comes out to you, believe them. Because that's a really privileged piece of information that they've just disclosed with you. And the quick second thing is get people's pronouns right. Please.
Ash, same question to you.
I think my advice would be to get comfortable with the unknown. So there are parts of the Bible that are difficult to understand and digest, and there's a lot more reading and learning that needs to happen behind those verses. We can't just take them at face value anymore. It's illogical to do that, and not particularly intelligent to do that. So I think getting comfortable with the unknown is probably the first thing. And I think respecting and loving the person in front of you, which means withholding judgment, because we can't put on those shoes. That's not our job. So I think those are probably the things that I'd recommend of a church that's wanting to start to get affirming, start to learn a little bit more. Yeah.
Fantastic. Selena?
Apart from the pronouns one, which I echo completely, ask questions of people who actually know what it's like. Do not rely on Google and YouTube. Ask people politely, and don't ask personal questions, but ask general questions. What does it mean to be transgender? What does it mean? What's that sort of question is fine. Ask politely. People have the option of saying, "Actually, I think you're asking something that's a little bit too personal here," and then respect that answer. Don't push them on it. But ask the people who've actually lived the experience rather than relying on social media to get your information.
And Katie?
One thing. He asked us to do one thing. Love each other. Do it. It's not hard. Don't judge people. Love them for who they are. If you need to ask questions, again, as Selena said, be respectful. Just love people as you find them. And that's something I love about MCC. It's a come-as-you-are church. We don't care what gender you present as. We don't care who you love. We just love you. They even love the straight people and cis people like my husband. Yeah.
I've got some straight friends.
Yeah, they're weird, but yeah. But just to say, we love everyone. It is not hard, people. Don't judge people. Don't have the minister up the front preaching love, unconditional love and redemption, and then have other people going, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. No, just love them, accept them. Don't tell them what they're doing is wrong. Just accept their choices, accept their gender. We're built that way. We are marvellous and wonderful. We are wonderfully made in God's image. In He, in she, in
Their
her, in
image.
hers image. Their image. Yes, absolutely. God is above gender. We are made in their image. Exactly, Jazz. Thank you.
So just to recap, this is not an ad for NCC.
Yes, it is.
If anybody's online just wants to demonstrate, this is not an ad for NCC, but you are more than welcome to come. Sundays, Bertha Road, United Church. 6 p.m, thanks Ryan. So just to recap, really that question, I think if you know of churches that want to become more affirming, it's ask the questions, it's love us. If someone says that they're LGBTI, just accept it and learn and research and think of new ways of looking at the Bible. Okay, so that's the questions for this lot from me. Are there questions for the panel or myself from you lot? Yes, I was going to say tumbleweed starts going down.
I have a
Yeah,
question.
go on.
So, obviously queer people don't exist as an object lesson for straight folk, but one of the things that have come up this evening is about like the relation between faith and gender and sexuality, and Christianity on a whole hasn't really given people, and especially, so now I'm thinking of straight cis people, a great relationship between their faith and sexuality. So I wonder, what is it that queer Christians have, if you have any thoughts that come to mind, what is it that queer Christians have to teach straight cis folk in the church about bringing those things together in the joyous delight of experiencing one's full self and desire?
I have an answer. If anyone else wants to answer. Yeah, so in terms of bringing together queerness and spirituality, and in particular Christianity, the thing that queer people, or sexually or gender diverse people have to do is look at society and look at what you've been given and go, actually, I don't know about that. You really have to get good at questioning everything and putting on your critical thinking cap. And not just relying on what other people have told you is true, but really seeking out after it and finding answers that work for you. So, like straight and cis Christians could be in a position where they might just think, oh, I've believed this my whole life, so this is just the way it is. But I would really encourage anyone who hasn't maybe looked into it that much to start researching, to start asking those hard questions that maybe you haven't thought about before.
Look, to me, it's about being as how God made you. But what's the greatest sin? Being as God made you, or hiding who God made you to be?
I just think we bring fabulousness to churches.
Absolutely.
And a good choir.
Good choir. We bring glitter. We bring feather boas.
And
Not that we're
sparkles.
stereotyping and sparkles, but we are
The
fair.
Anglican Church had that without gay people, though. You just look at the vestments we use.
That's
you know.
very true. That's very true. Having been brought up Anglican.
Yeah. But I think, I mean, it's been reiterated here, it's about asking questions, but also not assuming that you already know the answers. Too many people think, I don't need to ask that, it's too obvious, it's too simple. Well, actually, I think it was Einstein once said, he gets quoted with everything, but I'm told this was one of his, that common sense is a set of prejudices we draw up by the age of 18. So don't assume that it's just common sense what you know, that this must be the way it is. Do actually challenge yourself, challenge your own thoughts and beliefs, and ask yourself, do I know this to be true, or is this just me relying on past knowledge, past experience?
I was going to say as well, I think the concept of radical inclusion is something that queer people can bring to churches. And it's an ongoing journey. Like I myself am still learning how to love people better and how to, challenge preconceived ideas and things like that. And I think that's healthy to be someone who is feeling comfortable and safe to do that. And I think having a church that is affirming and has queer people in it is a space where it's safe to do that, and you can actually learn to love people better.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ash in that sense of like, if the goal of Christianity is to love people unconditionally and love without limits, then I think, queer people and like sexually and gender diverse people are really good at that. We exist kind of on the fringe of society sometimes, where a lot of people might be afraid to step out into. And so to have queer people interacting with a church, I think only enriches a church and helps to kind of extend their definition of what loving people looks like.
Amen. Any other questions? Denise?
I have a question bouncing around in my head, but it'll probably come out weird because I haven't quite thought it through. But it's about the idea of boundaries and crossing boundaries. Because when I think about Jesus, it seems to me that he was a boundary crosser. And I'm remembering back to an interview that we had at MCC last week when we interviewed John, an older gay man who said that for him, being gay forced him to not fit into anybody's boxes. Like it forced him to not be compliant. That he was by nature perhaps a compliant personality, but his gayness kind of blew that apart and prevented him from conforming to people's expectations. So I'm just trying to put those two together, and I'm wondering if your various experiences with your sexuality and gender, does that impact the way that you live life outside of those categories? Does it make it easier to cross boundaries in other parts of life? I don't know. Do you know what I'm getting at?
I do know what you're getting at, yes. And no, it doesn't make it easier to cross boundaries in other parts of life. I've still got the same anxieties that everybody does about crossing boundaries. Probably more so because transitioning, although I had a blessed transition, it's still a pretty tough gig. Yeah, actually, what Adam says is right. I'm probably more aware of the boundaries than anything. And he should know, he has to live with me.
Something I was thinking about, perhaps related to that, is I found a personal challenge to be more proactive when it comes to social justice. So where old Ash may not have had the courage to intervene in a situation, or may not have even had the passion to intervene in a situation. The fact that I am amongst people who have, very difficult lives, much more difficult than mine has been coming up in my story. I find that I have to take a mantle of social justice and do something about it and make those difficult decisions to intervene when I can and say something when I should. So that's just something that I've personally found. Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, it's you're aware that some will see you as the token trans person, and and therefore you are anything that's going to be discussed or debated or anything is going to be turned into a transgender debate, which is far from the truth. I'm quite happy to debate anybody on anything without having to play the trans card. So you're always a little bit aware of, people might try to steer conversations in a direction that actually they don't need to be steered in. You just need to respond to people as a human being rather than as a token trans person. So I think in that aspect, the boundaries are difficult to navigate. I won't say they're impossible, and I won't say that they're reinforced or made easier, but you are more aware of them and aware of what people are actually looking for when they ask you anything.
Yeah, and just to round out the panel on that question, I resonate with what Denise was saying in terms of when John was speaking, he was talking about being forced to kind of step outside of himself because of, his experience coming out and realizing that he's gay. And I definitely feel that way about myself in terms of, because of my realization that I'm pan, I'm attracted to people regardless of gender, that kind of takes me out of any one box of being gay or straight. I'm just kind of both. And with my gender, realizing that I'm, gender fluid and non-binary, like I can't put myself in any one gender box either. Sometimes I could be one gender, sometimes I could be another gender, sometimes I could be both. It just depends on the vibe. And it's definitely pushed me further than I thought I could ever go, really. And it's forced me to push God further than I thought God could go. And, in terms of being non-binary, people will often tell me like, oh, well, God created man and woman and that's it. But like, because that's something that I hear a lot, it's forced me to look into it and go, no, actually, that's not really the case. If we look at nature, like God created the noon and God created the day and God created the night, but God also created the sunset and the sunrise, and there's nothing sinful about the sunrise. Or if you want a more goofy example, God created the animals of the land and the animals of the sea, but frogs exist. Hello. I definitely think, what was it?
Well, amphibians cross the boundaries, like Denise was saying.
Yeah, exactly. Frogs cross the boundaries, that's right. So I definitely think that my lived experience as a queer non-binary person definitely puts me at the cross-section of a lot of boundaries that people often have trouble dismantling.
To talk about something as well, I think a lot of people think that we come out just the once and that we come out and that's it, but we come out almost every day. I started a new job last week, so I'm just constantly meeting new people. So we go through, as a community, we go through that coming out process, crossing those boundaries, almost on a daily basis.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, Kevin, as someone that uses they, them pronouns, just to reiterate, I use they, them pronouns. But I get misgendered every day. And so it's a constant battle of like, hi, I'm Jazz, I use they, them pronouns. Hi, I'm Jazz, I use they, them pronouns. It's definitely not a one-time thing. It's an everyday thing.
Okay. And just to end on, because Denise's brilliant sermon, I think, invited a lot of us about that crossover. What's the point of penguins? I think she ended with. Any other questions?
Right, I'd be interested on the thoughts both sides of the community, and we talked a bit about the latter, the engagement of the LGBTQ plus community and the church, and now we're talking about how does that impact on the church. I'm interested maybe in the other direction, in how do we as queer Christians, how do we engage with the LGBTQ plus community, in particular thinking about if we are to fulfill the Great Commission and to share our faith. That can be very challenging in a community that many times are spiritually wounded by what the small C church has done, or if they're just not particularly interested in talking about matters of faith. I wonder if you have any insights as to how we, dare I say the word, how we do evangelism, or how do we just share our faith in 2022 with things like Pride coming up, and how do we do this in this day and age? I don't have the answer. I'm curious.
I think from my observation of it, it's take part and turn up, or turn up and take part is probably the correct way around to do it. Just show, turn.
I didn't hear that either. Sorry, please repeat.
Sorry, that's new teeth I'm wearing in my friend. Turn up and take part. Be with them. Walk alongside them. Talk to them. I was offered recently an opportunity to talk on 4ZZZ radio, which I thought, great, I'll do that. And I was just able to gently talk about what my faith was, what my story was, and what I hope for the future sort of overlap of the church and the LGBT community, because we, as I said earlier on, we sort of span a bridge here. But I think, if we if Christians keep themselves to themselves and don't engage with any community, it doesn't have to be the LGBT community, it can be any community whatsoever, then they're not going to hear any message. So I think the first thing is to walk with them. Try walking a mile in their shoes with them, or alongside them at least. Don't try walking in my shoes, they'll cripple you. But not the ones I put on now. But just to be there with them and to show that you actually do what you say in the Bible. You do love them. I think that's part and parcel.
Yeah, I think you're right. A number of times I've been asked, how do you reconcile being part of an organisation that hates us so much? And my response is kind of, what organisation are you talking about? My church loves me for who I am. And I think what Selena says is right. We need to just walk with them, love them, and show them that not all churches are like the one that hurt them.
Yeah, I think it's really important, as you mentioned in your question, Brian, that a lot of people that have interacted with the church that are in the LGBT community do have a lot of trauma associated with that, and there's a lot of old wounds there. And I think it's really important to take that into account and think about what may have caused that damaged relationship. And based on my experience and other people that I've talked to, quite often what has been the most damaging is words, what people have said to them. And so I think us trying to use our words to try and fix those bad words can be like fighting fire with fire. But instead of using words, I think this is where some actions can come into play and really make a difference here. Because I personally will not ever evangelize to people in the traditional sense, but I will show up consistently. And if someone asks me a question, I'll answer it. But the way that I show other people my faith is by, genuinely caring about that other person, or, if they have a need that needs to be met, showing up and meeting that need. Like, if someone is having problems paying for their groceries that week, you might say, you know what, I'll cover it this time. Or, if someone's having problems, in their workplace, you might say, oh, I'm going to go in and advocate for you, or something like that. Really showing up and meeting people's needs, I think, is the first step to making change in this area.
I agree. Yeah, I have nothing to add.
Yeah, I think sometimes we are going to be the only Bible that people read. So I need to echo what you've all said. And to answer your question as well, sometimes we just need to live our lives the way that we live them.
Yeah,
Okay.
sorry, just to quickly add to that.
Sorry.
I think the battle that we're fighting at the moment is that a lot of people don't realise that we exist. And I say we in terms of like queer Christians or LGBT Christians. So I think, you know, just having a visible presence that it is possible to be, you know, a Christian and to be gay or to be trans or anything like that. I think right now just that visibility and awareness will do a lot of good as well.
Fantastic. Any other questions from our lovely audience?
So we touched on like a bit of advice that you might give for churches that want to be more affirming to the LGBT community and for those queer congregational members. But I guess what's some advice that you might want to give to some churches that may not have an LGBT presence there, that want to be affirming, that want to create that space, but don't necessarily have the LGBT community amongst them that they know of?
It's a really good question. I think that's where engaging with the community would come in. So I think, and it needs to be done in a way that people don't feel too jarred as well. So, for example, the church that I referenced earlier are only now considering their overall standpoint and policies and things like that and reviewing them. And I think there's a natural way to go about things in it. You know, we need representation in the church. So I think community engagement is probably a key thing, whether that's like just a barbecue or like a cuppa in the park or whatever it might be, where we can sort of get out and engage and meet people. And then even churches networking, so those churches that are affirming and queer friendly, and I think we need to have a look at, you know, how we can coordinate and you know, start to get to know our communities a little bit better, start to get engaged with different events that councils are hosting, and I think naturally we'll start to see more representation in churches. But it needs to be safe as well. So part 2 of that, I think, is churches need to make sure that they have the infrastructure and the people to make sure that if they do have queer people in their church, that they can be safe and they're going to be protected and you know, integrated as a member. Yeah.
I would probably think the very first step that a church that was wanting to become a safe place would need to take would be, yeah, as Ash says, network with churches that already are, inter-church visits even. Come and sit in a service and just see how it's done, see how people interact with each other. You've got to get the basics right before you can go anywhere else. Walk before you run.
I think the likelihood is that there are very few churches that don't have anybody that's LGBTQ in them. It's just that they're too scared to actually reveal their cards, as it were. That certainly has been true, in my case, certainly for a long time, and I know of other people who've said the same. I think there is what's been said about walking with other churches, meeting up with them is a good thing to do, but also just to, you know, actively engage the community directly. You know, I mean, there are most dioceses, you know, there are most churches, I should say, maybe. We all know of LGBT people in them. So invite them to your church to ask questions, to show them that, you know, people who are LGBT don't have two heads, and, you know, they're not spouting fire and what have you, but they are actual human beings. You know, they are people, they are just the same as everyone else. They just happen to be slightly different in some way, shape or form. As everyone is slightly different in some way, shape or form. We've all got something that we can be prejudiced against. So I think that's the recognition, the realization that actually there's a good chance there is already somebody in your congregation who is LGBT is step one. Step two is possibly engage with other churches, possibly just engage with the community directly, and there are plenty of ways of doing that.
And I am now going to do a shameless plug for Equal Voices. So if there are people online and you want to start having that conversation, contact me and I am more than happy to bring people along to your church to show that we are human and what it means to be an LGBTI Christian. So just contact us and I'm more than happy to come on a Sunday and talk to you.
Hi, sorry if I might answer the question also.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's all good, it's all good. Yeah, so just kind of like an overview answer, I suppose, is like, number one, policy. Like, does your policy reflect inclusive views? Like, if in your church policy it says that women or gender diverse people cannot preach, that's a bit of a problem. If it says in there that, queer people or people in same-sex relationships cannot preach, that's a bit of a problem. With your wedding policy, do you allow queer weddings to be held at your venue? If not, that's a bit of a problem. Do you allow queer people, whether that's like people in same-sex relationships or gender diverse people, to serve in the church? Do you allow them to work in the children's ministry? These are all really basic policies that you can review and look into to make your church more inclusive for the queer community. And also as well what Ash was saying about safety, doing some training with all of your staff so that everyone's on the same page about what inclusive behaviour looks like, I think is important. And to kind of echo what Selena said, queer people are already in the room, even if you think they aren't. I think that's a really good first step to take, is to approach this issue as if queer people are already in your congregation, because they probably are. And to wrap up, my last thing, I'm so sorry, this is what you get when you ask me to speak on a panel. I will speak. So the last thing I want to add here is that as sexually and gender diverse people, it is often, the weight of advocacy is often put on our own shoulders, and that becomes a really heavy weight to bear. So I would say that if there are churches out there that don't have a queer presence at them yet and are looking to invite queer people in, make sure that you do not put that burden of advocacy on their shoulders. Make sure that you continue to carry it and continue to seek out that work and initiate it yourself instead of relying on the queer people in the community to do it for you.
Thank you. And apologies, I missed you now.
It's fine, I'll allow it, Kevin.
She called me cool earlier, so that's good.
Kevin, I will revoke your cool status. Be careful.
Darren, please don't do that. Please don't do that.
They were being ironic, Kevin.
And
For anyone who's streaming, how would they contact you if they want to get Equal Voices involved?
that's a very good question. Thank you,
Your
Ryan.
PR
No, that's a really good
Your
question.
PR secretary.
If they contact the cooperative,
So your tag, Equal Voices is tagged on the cooperative's Facebook post. So if they're on the Facebook page right now, they'll be able to
Alright.
look at the Pride and Prejudice event, and Equal Voices is tagged there.
and that
They
will
can message you.
that message will come through to my phone. But any other issues there, get in touch with the cooperative and they'll get in touch with me. Alright, any other questions before I ask our panel one last question? Alright, so one last question for the beautiful people here. So if there's someone in here in the room or online who is thinking, who are a Christian mother and they're thinking of coming out to their family and congregation, what is the one, please note I said the word one, piece of advice that you would want to share with them? Jazz.
Ooh.
I better start with Jazz, as I because in fact I missed her out.
Yeah.
Missed
Miss
them
them
No,
out.
I'm sorry.
Kevin.
I corrected myself really quickly, I'm sorry.
That's strike two, Kevin. You've gotten it wrong twice in one event. Is this event inclusive or not, Kevin? Come on now.
No, that's probably my age and me
Alright, I will just reiterate that I use they them pronouns, okay, just so we're clear. But yeah, it is what it is, Kevin. Anyway, so the question was advice to someone that wants to come out, right?
Someone who's Christian and they want to come out, one piece of advice that you would give them.
Okay, my piece of advice to a Christian that wants to come out is find your allies before you come out. And what I mean by that is you can ask people questions about queerness without revealing that you are queer. So, for example, when I was thinking about coming out, same-sex marriage had just been passed in the US in 2015. So sometimes I would go to church and I'll ask people like, oh, what do you think about, now same-sex marriage has been legalized? Like, as a Christian, like, what's your perspective on that? And then if that person went off on a rant about, oh, absolutely not, no way, then it's clear that that person is not safe and they're not an ally for you. But if that person goes like, oh, well, maybe it's not a bad thing, I think it could be good to give people choice and, respect their lives, respect, like the people that they want to marry, then maybe that's someone that could be a little bit more safe for you, So I think you can ask discreet questions to kind of get out your private investigator magnifying glass and find if there are safe people around you to make sure it's safe to come out.
Brilliant, thank you. Ash?
My advice would be to stay close to God. So people will disappoint you and people will also encourage you and surprise you. But yeah, for me personally, it was staying close to God and spending time with Him, whether that was like listening to music or whatever it might have been. And if you don't know the character of God, I think it's best revealed in Jesus' character in the Bible. So that's my advice.
Brilliant, thank you. Katie?
Build your family of choice. I think if anything got me through it, it was having an amazing family of choice around me.
Set your own agenda and timescales. Do not come out before you are ready to do so. Do not come out before because somebody else is pressing for it. You set your timescales and you do it when you are ready, not before.
Brilliant, thank you. And it has been a pleasure leading this discussion tonight, and I think it's also showing that even within our community we do make mistakes. Hands up, Kevin. Yeah. So I have learned something new again this evening. So I did start with a quote, and I'd like to end with two, both from American authors. So the first is an author called Max Dupree. We need to give each other the space to grow, to be ourselves, to exercise our diversity. We need to give each other space so that we may both give and receive such beautiful things as ideas, openness, dignity, joy, healing and inclusion. And the beautiful Maya Angelou said, it's time for parents to teach young people early on that in diversity there is beauty and there is strength. So thank you to our audience, both in person, thank you for being here. Those that are online, I know Joe is watching down in Sydney. To the cooperative, and mainly to our guests, thank you for being here. God bless you, go in peace, and good night. And I've just realised that if I press the green button, the mic works.